Welcome to our inaugural episode of Courageous Healing. My name is Victor Escalante. I am the producer and co-host of this podcast. Joining me today is my good friend, Adele George. Adele, welcome to this journey that we're about to embark on.
So glad to be here, and I'm so glad to be co-hosting this with you.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think there will be lots of tears shed, lots of stories told, and for sure, healing. That is the focus of this podcast, is helping you to hold your hand, to bring you resources, to bring you awareness of what you need to know in order to heal. If you are a victim of domestic violence, or really any kind of healing that you need, but the space of this particular podcast is family violence. Something that is taboo still among different spaces, but we need to shine the light on it. It's time that we have that honest and open conversation to talk about the blight on society and the damage that is done to people. So Adele, why don't we start by telling people how you and I have a history of a friendship that spans over 18 years. So why don't you tell listeners how we got started?
It's been a long time, and I think our listeners need to know how good friends we are and why we came together and how important it is. And, I just want to say healing is important to both of us. And, it's important that we take off any sort of blinders, and no subject is taboo when it comes to talking about trauma and healing, especially with domestic violence and family violence and sexual assault and anything along those lines. But we want people to heal. We want people to feel better, and we want people to live their best lives. So I think that that's one of the things that brought Victor and I together. But God, 18 years ago, we were just some quirky friends who had a sarcastic personality.
Yes. So I met Adele 18 years ago or so in a social network online. This is when social media was still in its infancy. And there was this gentleman. Do you remember his name?
No.
It'll come to me as we go along. But he started a social network, a digital online platform called the world's prettiest people, or the world's most beautiful people. That's what it was. His name is Jason. Okay. Jason, if you're listening to this podcast, this is a positive byproduct of the seeds that you planted back then, my friend. It was hilarious because he would come up with all these by trade. I have to give people the context. By trade, Jason was a former stockbroker that he made millions of dollars on Wall Street, lost it all, and started back up with a renewed sense of direction in life, wanting to start a spiritual spiritual-minded community, where people could come together, they could share ideas, they could share inspiring quotes, stories, what have you. So I began to see it for what it was, not because the intention was flawed, but because just human nature. Because I was an early adopter, Adele. I don't know what your experience was, but I was an early adopter of AOL groups. Do you remember that?
Yeah, same.
So I started interacting with AOL groups, and then I'm going to date myself even further back with news groups. Do you remember news groups, to where you would do a posting and then you would have comments that would run forever?
Yes.
People commenting to your post. So I was a very early
precursor to Reddit.
Yes, correct. So I was an early adopter, and I started doing extensive writing, and I began to see the dynamics of online groups, how there was everything. I mean, it was a wild, wild west. It was a jungle, and everything went. And so I began to see the groupies and the coalitions that were being formed inside those groups. And I quickly began to see that forming in Jason's network. And of course, you know, you had to find your group, right?
Right.
your clique. Right. And so I think you and I were unique in that we didn't have a clique. We were like a clique of one, right?
Right.
And so we would comment, we would banter, we would laugh. But behind that, there was a lot of history and some of the people that were joining.
Yes. That website was hilarious. I think that was the thing, though, it was, you know, people were coming there searching for one thing, and it was kind of on repeat. And so after a while, we kind of got snarky about it because
well, you have to, because it became entertainment for the both of us.
Yes.
And so what I began to see as the network grew, I mean, at one time it was over 100,000 people, because Jason spent a small fortune. I once asked him, Jason, how much money have you sunk into this? Back then, and I didn't stay with the network until its demise, but he had already spent upwards of $50,000.
Wow.
Of his own money trying to promote it and trying to get people to join. Remember all the crazy rants that he would go into to put your picture on your avatar, instead of leaving it blank and commenting and joining in. I mean, the poor guy was in over his head, not understanding human nature, not understanding online communities. And he would go through these bipolar moments, the highs and lows. When things were good, he was on top of the world. When things were bad, he was at his lowest.
Well, but regardless of all of that, the thing is, it brought us to a really hilarious friendship.
Yes, I adopted the role, my alter ego of Father Vic. Okay, Father Vic was that character on Saturday Night Live that's smoking. Remember that priest that with a hat that was smoking and would curse? Yeah. That's the persona that I took on to banter with. I called them new wagers, new wagers, to where they were pseudo spiritual people that were trying to make a buck off of desperate people. Yeah. And so that's how it began. Now, eventually, I outgrew Jason's network. It became Spiritual Networks, and I outgrew it. And I think I left before you did. I don't remember.
I think I lost interest in it when it got a little bit too dramatic for me. Yeah, I wasn't really looking for anything there. Yeah, I was just hanging out, checking it out. This was, you know, when websites and internet and that type of thing was still pretty new to me. Yes. And experiences and stuff. So for me, it was just kind of exploring it. And then when I kind of didn't get anything out of it, I never went back. And for me, like, I remember it, and I remember meeting you, but I don't remember much else, as far as I remember the rants. I remember the things like that. But for me, the most valuable thing I got out of it was our friendship.
Yeah, for sure. We kept in contact, listeners, over the years, and we would, just catch up with each other, how things were going in our lives. Adele lives in New Orleans, where she's home based, and I'm home based in Houston. So whenever I saw that there was major storms in Louisiana and in Houston, we would stay in contact to find out whether we were okay. I think in one of the hurricanes, you lost your house, didn't you, Adele?
I never actually lost my house. My townhouse that I lived in got sustained damage from 2 different hurricanes. So I got damaged twice.
Okay. And of course, I kept up with your dogs. You kept up with my son.
Yes.
so, so we just had this innate curiosity about each other's lives. And then one day, out of the blue, we started chatting, which kind of brought us to a point that we decided to go down this path.
Well,
So,
and I
but
think
I'm getting ahead of myself.
well,
Uh,
before you go there, though, I think you have to remember we're both in marketing. We're both marketers.
yes, yes, that's true.
So, we really, once we both realized that we were driving down the same career path. And while you're not, your marketing took you in a different direction than me, we're still marketers. And that's a badge of honor. That's something that you carry around with you when you walk in and talk to other marketers. So that was definitely a bonding moment for us as well.
That's true. Once a marketer, always a marketer. And
Yeah.
we relate to one another because we understand media. We understand the trends, how they're evolving and constantly changing, and how legacy media right now is on life support because of all the different habits of the new generations that are not consuming media the way they used to. And so Adele and I have always had an intellectual curiosity about media and marketing. And so that's also has been a common bond between us. And so at that point, Adele, that we started talking about taking this to another level, let's back up. You had a couple of incidents that happened in your life that kind of begin to take you down a path that you knew that it was time to go down this path. So tell us about that, Adele.
Yes. So I am a survivor of domestic violence. I was married, and this happened back in the mid 90s. I was married to someone who was abusive. And the situation ended in 1996. And it didn't end well, and it ended with a significant amount of tragedy and drama involved around it. So I took a lot of time out of my life to make an effort to heal. So about 2 years ago, I was asked to be part of a documentary. And this documentary in particular was about negotiators, people who helped people get out of very uncomfortable situations, traumatic related situations, and life or death type situations. My particular involvement in this documentary was it was about the ending of my marriage. So my ex-husband, who was at the time a law enforcement officer, had come into my place of employment and made the decision to hold us hostage for 27 hours. During that time frame, of course, there were negotiators that were involved. So I was asked to be a part of telling the story and making sure that the story was accurate for this documentary. Well, once the documentary came out, I shared it to all my social media places, and one of my friends who works for a local jail asked me to go and speak to a local population of the female inmates, as well as some people that she works with. That she's an educator, and she has a program that she speaks to first-time offenders of abuse. And so this program helps them actualize and understand why they abuse and how they abuse and what abuse actually is.
You're listening to Courageous Healing Podcast. We'll be right back.
Looking for the perfect soundtrack to bring your project to life? Meet Roy D. Haston, an experienced composer who creates captivating music for films, commercials, and live events. From emotional scores to upbeat, energetic tracks, Roy's compositions add depth and emotion to every story. His unique soundscapes elevate your project and leave a lasting impression. Visit roydhaston.com and discover how Roy's music can transform your next project into something unforgettable. And thank you, Roy, for your original music for our Courageous Healing podcast.
we now return you to the Courageous Healing Podcast.
So the first thing I did was went and talked to abusers. And when I sat down and talked to them, I was told afterwards that they were expecting it to be sort of a man-bashing conversation. But in the end, when they realized that I was sitting there and I was just talking about what I went through and what my ex went through and how this became the situation it did, it really opened them up, and they really had something to relate to in order to understand sort of like how they got on their path and perhaps how they became, violent or had issues with their temper and stuff like that. So it really impacted them, and they really had something to relate back to. After that, I went and talked to the female population a few weeks later, and I spoke to about 45 women. I don't remember exactly. And sitting there telling them my story and sitting there and really letting them know that they were worthy and they were valuable really touched me as much as it did them. And in both situations, I told them, they're worthy and they're valuable. And, they're worthy human beings. They're worthy of love and they're worthy of all good things. And so it really touched me. And the thing that moved me was I started to realize that they didn't know what healing was and they didn't have the option. They weren't presented with the option of healing. They weren't presented with the option of unconditional love in most cases. So that's really something that shook me to the core. And that's what made me pick up the phone and call you and say, we got to do this. We've got to do a podcast. We've got to talk about this. And we've got to start making people realize that trauma happens and that you can heal from it and that there's ways that you can get help, and we want you to get help.
Absolutely. And listeners, you've seen me do light postings of my past. I actually worked in the criminal justice system for 10 years, creating programs of reform for offenders on probation for gang violence, for domestic violence, for drugs and alcohol abuse, and just about any kind of crime that would get you into the penitentiary because the treatment that you were getting or the avoidance of treatment would put you into being a repeat offender. And of course, you were able to, you were sentenced by a judge to go to prison. And then inside of the prison system back then in Texas, there were reform programs for addicts who suffered from chemical dependency. That's considered alcohol and drugs. And so you came out as a condition of early release. If you did that program, you could knock off, I don't remember back then how many months, but I want to say like about a year. And so if you did that, you could come out, but you were under conditions of probation, which meant that you were still now in the system, subject to be rearrested and reincarcerated if you did not follow the rules of probation, which was getting treatment, getting help, going into different treatment programs that were court-ordered for you in order to come out of the system. And so those were the offenders that I was working with, and I got to hear all kinds of horrible stories. And of course, the story begins to repeat itself. I would say that the faces change, but the story is very similar, Adele.
Yes, the stories are always very similar. And, with what I began to realize over time, because obviously this happened to me in 1996. And hindsight being 2020, the things that I started to realize was that a person doesn't just wake up and decide to choose violence. There's something that happened, something that brought them to that state in that place. And what I ended up having was a lot of compassion for those people, the people that committed the violence, because they don't know what they don't know. And
Exactly.
if they get a chance to heal and they didn't get a chance to be told that they could be okay, or that they didn't have to live this way and things didn't have to happen this way, and that no one actually approached them with compassion, and because of their violence and because of who they are, they're like my ex-husband. My ex-husband's 51 years old. He went into prison at the age of 22, 23 years old. And he's been in there ever since, and he's never going to come out. Yep. So, he's not been able to live a life outside of the walls of prison. And because of his mental health, he's not getting the treatment and the help he needs there.
Right.
So I'm really becoming, I want people who have been through domestic violence, such as people like myself, to get the help that they need, and to make sure and to know that they can heal, and that you don't have to live this way on repeat. And I want the people who are abusers to know that there's options for them too. And also that we're at a point now where, while we can sit down and talk about mental health and the lack of it in this country, we're at a point now where we're starting to be able to recognize behaviors early in a person's life, where we can do intervention. We can, let's focus on intervention. Let's focus on stopping it before it starts. Let's focus on helping people before they become violent. That's important too. But I think this is a topic that we're going to have, while we're going to have a lot of fun with it.
Yes.
It's a compassionate topic. And when we talk about it,
the focus is on helping you heal. Okay. Yes. You're going to hear us talk over and over and over again. This is about you. This is about you finding your space, your path, your journey, your healers, the people that you tend to gravitate to, the authors, the seminar leaders, the ministers, whoever you turn to is finding that person, trusting God to be led down to the path of healing, and trusting the process, and trusting that the right people will show up for you. But I want to go back, Adele, to the impact that you had on those particular groups, and how you had them on tears, how they broke down when you, as a survivor of abuse, was showing compassion to them. And obviously they felt that compassion, and that some part of them felt that self-acceptance, because a lot of abusers, they have deep down a self-hatred that keeps them stuck, because they were not loved, because they were shunned, because they were punished early on. All they know is punishment. And so at a deep level, on an unconscious level, they have this belief that they're bad. And like you put it, it's not so much that they're bad. No one is born bad. The exception is psychopaths, which their wiring is different than the average person. But most people are not born bad. The environment makes them flawed and maladaptive in terms of not having the proper skills to respond to their emotions, to know how to have a healthy relationship, to know how to be disagreeable without necessarily flying into a fit of rage.
Right. And, we know that a lot of people who grew up in violent situations, have a tendency to become violent.
Or yes, the pattern repeats itself.
Yeah.
And we hope that you are the breaker of that family pattern that sometimes runs several generations deep.
Yes. What we're calling out at this point is, breaking those generational traumas and breaking those bonds that you would particularly continue to carry on, and putting your stake in the ground and saying, this stops with me. and this isn't going to happen anymore. And the thing is there's so many different ways that you can be abused. There's so many different ways that abuse manifests itself in situations that people don't necessarily think they're abused, or they don't think that they're in situations where they're abused until 10, 15, 20 years later when they go, oh shit, that person treated me like crap. I thought they were just treating me like crap when holy crap, they were really abusing me.
Yeah.
And because abuse is so many different layers. So really
full disclosure, Adele and listeners, I didn't realize that I had verbal abusive patterns until I read the book, Verbal Abuse. Okay. In that book, it helped me to realize how, in being married to the spouse that I was at the time, because I have a lot to tell you about that, I developed abusive language patterns to where I was, the typical gaslighting, being sarcastic, being silent. I mean, we're going to do an entire episode on verbal abuse, the patterns to recognize, because again, I didn't know that, that I was being verbally abusive. And so it's not like we men were born with a manual on how to treat your spouse when there is maladaptive behavior on their part, how to respond properly. So, you're on your own. You kind of have to adapt on your own. And sometimes in the process, you end up picking up some really bad habits.
Yeah. And I want people to understand, and I want our listeners to understand that the goal here and the ultimate goal here is to show you that you can heal.
Yes, so absolutely.
We're going to show you, we're going to have some really heavy story, guys. We're going to have some really heavy stuff to talk about. But in the end, we want you to walk away each time knowing that and feeling like healing is an option, and healing is something that you can do too. And there's many, many, many ways to heal. There's a multitude of ways that you can find your own path. And while our focus is primarily around trauma that is developed from abuse, from some form of abuse, we know that there's many other ways. However, this is our corner of expertise. And this is where, how and where we want to help you grow, and we want to help you find your way to a better path.
Absolutely.
And find your healing. So we're here for you. If you have questions, we're happy to answer them. If there's a topic that you're interested in, if there's someone that we should consider interviewing, we would love to interview you guys and have you on, tell your story, your path of healing, any of it. We're sitting here. We're happy to do it because we want to spread the word. We're going to blow the doors off of violence. We're going to blow the doors off of domestic violence and sexual abuse, sexual assault. We're going to talk about all of that. None of this is going to be taboo. It's all going to be talked about. It's all going to be words that you're going to hear that are going to make you uncomfortable. However, the goal is to make you uncomfortable, to bring you to the point to realize that there's options out there for healing.
Absolutely. Is that enough show, Adele?
I think so.
I think so. Well, we're going to leave it there, folks. And until next time, go out and have a great week.
Yep. See you guys.